Hello, book lovers, and welcome to the first episode of Authors Love Bookstores for 2022. Happy New Year. I'm your host, Joe Moldover, and I am so happy to be back here with you today. Every week, my partner Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence and I support independent bookstores across the US, Canada, and the United Kingdom. And I am completely delighted to be here today with my personal favorite state, the state of Maine, and with Left Bank Books in Belfast. We're welcoming Nancy Hauswald and Barbara Klausmeyer. Welcome to you both. Thank you so
Hi.
much for being here.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And we are joined by the author Gregory Brown. Greg is a graduate of Iowa Writers Workshop. He is a native of Maine, and he's coming to us from his home in Casco, Maine. He is the author of the debut, The Lowering Days. Oftentimes, when I am introducing an author, I will pull comments from reviews on the web, from blurbs and things like that. But today the audience is going to get a Joe Moldover review. I thought The Lowering Days was simply one of the most gorgeous and moving books that I've read in a very long time. It is lyrical, it is moving, it has unforgettable characters. I did not want it to end, which is not something that I can oftentimes say for a novel. And it is a novel that is written about flawed characters, but from a place of very deep compassion, which I think is rare and beautiful. So, Greg, thank you for being here, and congratulations on this wonderful book.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, thank you for the kind words and for having all of us today.
Absolutely. To the audience, it's our 82nd episode. Many of you know what to do, but if you have questions, if you have comments, please put them into the chat. We will get to as many of them as we can. We'll be posting, including information about how to purchase books, including Greg's book, from Left Bank Books. Greg, we're going to kick things off by coming to you first. We're all here today because you nominated Left Bank Books as a beloved independent bookstore. And I wonder if you'll just tell me a little bit about why and what makes it so special.
Yeah, Joe, when you reached out to me, I immediately thought of Left Bank. And I think the reason I immediately thought of Left Bank is because it's been such a presence in my life in its current iteration and kind of in former iterations. I grew up in Belfast, where the bookstore is. And we were talking earlier about this. I mean, I've known Barb since before I was born. You know, my parents were in a Lamaze class with them. So, and I grew up, playing over at her house, playing with her son, Peter. He was a friend of mine. And before she ran Left Banks with Nancy, they were in another bookstore called the Furlmine Bookshop. And when I was a kid, that was like the bookshop that I would go to. That was the place in town that kind of kept the community just surrounded by books and information. And it was such a gathering place. And Left Bank has been that for a decade now.
17 years.
17. Does that include the short period where you were over in Searsport too?
Yeah.
So my whole life, I was away from Belfast away from Maine for 15 years. And people in my family would keep me posted on what was happening at the bookstore. I would get these clippings from my grandmother from the newspaper about events, and I would just kind of always feel very in the loop there, even though I was removed. So it's been the center of like arts and books and literature loving in the Mid-Coast for such a long time, and it's just held a really fond spot in my heart, even when I was close and when I was away. So I immediately kind of wanted to be on this show with Barb and Nancy from Left Bank.
I love it. I think it's wonderful, and I think it really captures what's so special about independent booksellers in terms of just being such a staple of the community and kind of a touchstone for people who live there. Barb and Nancy, I'd love to come to you. So you go way, way back with Greg, about as far back as it's possible to go.
Yeah.
And you knew him way back when. Much more recently, last year, you brought him to the store, I think virtually, for an event with Pulitzer Prize winner Richard Russo. What was that like to host that event and to sort of bring Greg home in that way?
Well, it was sort of thrilling actually, because this is I have the book here too, and it's a personal favorite of mine. When I first when he first contacted us and told us that he was publishing a book, I was a little skeptical, like, this is a kid from Belfast who used to play with my son. It can't be very good. But they were touting him as the next Louise Erdrich, and that kind of got my attention. And as soon as we got a copy of the Galley Uncorrected Proof, I devoured it, and he has amazing powers of description. And I think he should be congratulated because he takes on describing a community that is portrays the native community interacting with the Maine community, and he does it so beautifully that I thought he must have some Native American experience in his own family. He does it very authentically, and the book is just stunning. And it was so thrilling to have a homegrown boy write on such a fabulous level. So it was a thrill for us to welcome him. And when Rick Russo said he would carry on the conversation, Rick is an old friend of ours from way back, and that was just a great pairing in our mind. We were very happy.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm sorry I missed it. Greg, I want to ask you a little bit about what this idea about the sense of place. Before I do, I want to remind the audience, both the people who are with us live and those of you who will be watching in future time, that you can pick up a copy of Lowering Days from Left Bank Books. We're going to put the information to do that in the chat. Please do so. Pick up a couple of other books as well. They've got shelves full of them. Greg, you know, I think it's true. There is a very, very powerful sense of place in this book. And, you know, as I said in the intro, I'm somebody who loves Maine. And I think one of the many things I loved about the book was that this book couldn't have taken place anywhere else. You know, you couldn't have said, you know, you couldn't, this couldn't be sort of in like Wyoming or something. I mean, it's you know, it's a real Maine book. And I wonder sort of how you thought about it in terms of the process of writing it. Were you sort of consciously trying to evoke that sense of place? Were you sort of leaning into those descriptions, or is it just something that sort of suffuses your work inevitably?
Yeah.
Technology.
Yeah.
Oops.
Oh, hold on, Greg. I think we lost your audio for a second.
Am I back?
You're back.
Yeah. All right. I was saying I got a new computer for Christmas after 12 years of using the same MacBook and just watching it slowly fall apart. So I'm still figuring out what's syncing with what via the cloud.
Right.
I don't know how that relates to place, except, you know, everything's in different places now. So for different devices. But for me, I mean, my impetus to write fiction was really to kind of capture the sensation of place, or the sensation that the place brought up in me growing up. So I find that, you know, as soon as I started writing fiction, like my stories were always very much kind of rooted in landscape and rooted in the interaction of character and environment. When I was out in grad school at Iowa, you know, like people used to joke that I was like, you know, the dean of place, or like, you know, the dean of landscape centered writing and all these things, which I always kind of liked. Sometimes it was spoken in a praiseworthy way. Other times it was almost kind of spoken like, you know, can you do something else other than just start with place? And I didn't want to do anything else other than start with place. So for the Lowering Days, you know, I knew I wanted to write what in my mind was kind of a love letter to the place that I was from, which is Scott River Valley. Granted, it's a fictional Maine in ways, and a Maine of my imagination, but so many echoes of the landscape and the community I grew up in came into that book and come into most all of my work. So I have a hard time ever imagining not focusing on place with fiction. And in the conversation with Richard Russo, one of the things we got into was, you know, where you begin a book. You know, do you begin with an idea? Do you begin with place? Do you begin with character? And how do those things come together? And I always thought that, you know, his work had an incredibly strong sense of place. He's one of my favorite authors and has been for a long time. And he was talking about how he never felt like he had started a book or written like a place-centric novel. And I found that kind of interesting because every time I read a novel, it feels somewhat place-centric to me. I'm always noticing place. And I think that's just maybe my particular like persuasion as a reader and a writer.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the idea, and it's a love letter to Maine because it absolutely is. Barb and Nancy, before we came on air, we were just chatting a little bit, and we were talking about um, Maine writers and the number of writers who are in Maine. I mean, obviously, everybody knows Stephen King. You're talking about Richard Russo, but I mean, I wonder if you have any ideas about what it is in the community that sort of um, encourages writers, about the Maine writerly community and vibe, whether Maine draws writers. We talked before coming on about Gigi Georges, who I believe is from away, but I think now is in Maine. What do you think? What is it with Maine and writing?
Well, that's a good question. It's actually one that's very near and dear to my heart. For years, I've tried to answer that question, or I've tried to find out why that is, because it's not just Belfast, it's not just Portland, it is the state. But I think it's larger than that. I think it's New England, and throughout, I think more than any other place in the country, except maybe the Deep South, in the sort of Faulkner, O'Connor, tradition. There's just been a rich literary heritage since the earliest days of our country. I think in part, this is pure speculation, I think in part it's because of some of the earliest universities in the country, colleges and universities, and the religious tradition that cherished literature was here in New England, first and foremost. And I think that tradition of caring about the written word has come down through the centuries. And Maine is, I think, for artists, for visual artists and for writers, it just has this magnetic pull. And
I think it also has a little bit of a sense of retreat, that people would come to Maine to write because they can get away from civilization to some extent, and the pulls of that. And also the long winter is probably conducive to people being inside and really working on their craft, and having a time of year where they're active and outdoors and involved with people, and then a time of retreat and being able to look inward and have some leisure time when the snow is falling or the freezing rain or whatever it is at the moment, that gives them the opportunity to be introspective and think and write.
And I'm sure Greg knows that from the importance of solitude. And if I just put the one writer who comes to mind as looking at Maine as a place to retreat to write is I call him our dear friend, now deceased, but E.B. White, who lived about an hour and a half up the road. And, goodbye to 42nd Street, to come to Maine to write. Yeah. So I'm sure
That's so well said. Yeah, I love all of those ideas. And I'm coming to you from Massachusetts, and I appreciate being included in the Barb and Nancy, I'm going to stick with you for a moment, and let's talk a little bit about book selling and publishing, which is a lot of what this show is about. First of all, you're coming to us from the store, so you're open. You're coming to us with your masks.
Yeah.
This has obviously been it's been, I think no one needs me to say it, it's been an extremely difficult time, and particularly for small independent bookstores. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in Belfast, what's going on with your store, and how you're getting through it.
Well, it was a challenge, 2 years ago when this all kind of dropped like a bomb, and we really, and I remember when the governor said everybody shuts, and we were like, well, not us. No, yes, you too have to close your store. We're really only closed 3 days of the year. In total, we're just always open. So, and actually we only remained, I think I only spent 1 day at home. We came back in and we immediately went into the mode of working, through the phone and through emails and filling orders. And we did a lot of mailing. Our center, beautiful round center display table, became a packaging and mailing center. And we shipped a lot of books at that time, but we also did curbside delivery, and many people called and asked us just to take it out to the curb when we set up piano seat out there, a piano bench and a basket. And we also to thank people for being so devoted to us and making a point of keeping us going and ordering from us. We would always attach one of our fancy signature salted caramels to the outside of the bag to thank people. And people were incredibly excited about that. Getting the book was one thing, but getting the candy for free was another. But anyway, we went into that mode for a number of months. And then when we finally were able to open with social distancing and limiting how many people came in and requiring masks, which we still do require masks, people were just so grateful to be out and back in the bookstore. So honestly, we had quite a surge of support and actually had
a very good year.
A very good year.
That's great.
Yeah. And I think part of that too, Bart, is because we have this track record. At that point, we had been in business 15 years. We have an extremely loyal clientele. We have, and of course, we have an extremely loyal clientele year round. We have just, the people who are residents here year round. And then we have this huge influx of summer people, many of whom come from Massachusetts. And I can't begin to tell you how many emails and calls we got from people who, during the days we were shut, the weeks we were shut because of the governor's order, they would order from us saying, "We want you to be here when we come back, come, and we want you to be here." And so they supported us throughout the first 18 months, which were, by far the most difficult. So we're just incredibly blessed with a clientele of really loyal, passionate readers. And also, Greg, I'm sure you know this, and probably Joe, that there's also certainly here in Maine, I don't know about Massachusetts, a real passion for shopping locally and keeping your dollars local. I wish if we had a nickel for every time somebody came in here and said, "I could get this book 20% cheaper somewhere else." But we want to support you. Yeah. And that happens almost every day.
That's great. I love it. That's absolutely right. I mean, my local indie is Wellesley Books in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and I have a deep, deep attachment to it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that's a real bond between readers and writers and their local indie. I love the way you talk about that. Greg, I want to ask you, Barb and Nancy were talking about the appeal of Maine for some writers as a getaway from sort of the real world, as it were. I want to ask you about the pandemic. Many of our viewers are aspiring writers or writers themselves. But the pandemic has been a time when we have kind of gotten away from the real world. And yet I think most writers I know have really, really struggled with productivity, with creativity. Tell us about you. What's been your story? Have you been able to write? How have you been able to write? What's been your deal?
It's a really good question, and not something that I think a lot of authors are getting the chance to talk about as much as they like. It's been so beautiful to see people support independent bookstores at the level they have. Because what's happened at Left Bank, for you, Barb and Nancy, I've heard that echoed from so many other independent booksellers in Maine. I feel like the whole state is just getting behind, one, local businesses, and two, like their bookstores at the maximum level they can. And like I've loved watching that. And I feel like sometimes that as bookstores have continued to flourish, some writers, myself included, have continued to struggle to produce. I've had a really hard time writing this year. And I think that some of that is just everything that goes into having a book come out. We talked a little bit about the stillness or kind of the solitude of Maine. And I would echo that that's one of the things that makes Maine so appealing to writers. It's this ability to just be unbothered and to be kind of still. You need a lot of stillness to write a book. And also there's this space to kind of let your imagination go. It's a place that doesn't have, the population density of much of the country. And it also kind of, I feel like it's a place that supports kind of wacky ideas. You can, let your imagination freely move. So during the pandemic, there was all this time and all this stillness. but that didn't lead to writing for me, because there's so much mental activity happening. There's so much, kind of dealing with everybody together, which is beautiful, but makes it really hard to find the stillness to concentrate. My wife is a therapist, and she has a private practice, and she has an office of her own, and immediately she's working from home. I'm working from home. My daughter's homeschooling here. It's the story that we all kind of lived, which I thought was really, really sweet. And I didn't realize until a ways into it that it was also a really good excuse to not write. It's easy to write right now. My family's all around me. But one thing that happened for me, I spent several years writing the Lowering Days, and kind of being the only writer in the room, so to speak. And one of the things that's awesome about Maine is how many writers that are in the state. We've talked about that. And when I was out in Iowa at the Writers Workshop, there were writers everywhere too. So I went from Iowa to Portland, Maine, which is just a bustling city full of artists and writers. Then I moved away out to Casco, which is a very small town. It's about 3,000 people. It's mostly trees and lakes. And I finally had the space kind of to focus on, fiction again. And for me, that was great to just kind of to seal up and focus. So then, I had published a lot of stories over the years, and I have several, friends who are writers and who are novelists and have had their first book come out, but I didn't know what to expect when mine came out. So suddenly my book comes out, and there's no hiding anymore. When you have a book out, and launching a book during a pandemic was really interesting as well. I thought it went quite well. I've enjoyed the process of being able to connect with people all over the world via Zoom events, but at the same time, you don't have that experience of being able to be in a bookshop and just, be face to face with your readers. In a perfect world for me, I had, dreamed of having a launch at a place like Left Bank in person. And that day when there's an in-person event at Left Bank will come. I was able to do a few in-person events outside this summer, and it was so much better than I anticipated it being. Like, I had thought the Zoom launch and the Zoom book tour was a lot of fun, and then I had an in-person event with a book, and I'm like, oh my god, this is really this is 19 times better than anything I could have possibly imagined. It's a long rambling answer, but I guess my point is it's been challenging to write. The last third and fourth of the year were better. I've started to kind of get back into a rhythm, kind of feeling closer to my artistic self in ways. And so far in 2022, I'm carving out, I guess we're 5 days in, but I'm carving out space to write on a daily basis, which for me, I'm not always a daily writer. I'm thinking about what I'm working about every day. But when I can be a daily writer, I become a better writer. There's something to be said just for accruing pages towards a goal. The goal or the book starts to kind of gather realness as you write towards it.
That's so well said. I love that. Greg, going to follow up. We've got an audience question for you I want to pose. Sure. The question is circling back to this idea of sense of place, and it is whether Maine will feature in your future works, or whether we're going to, or will you branch out to new locales? Are we going to get a Greg Brown Idaho novel, or what can we look for in the future?
I feel like I would have to live in Idaho for a long time to feel comfortable doing that in some ways. No, the novel I'm working on now is also focused and centered in Maine. And I have a couple other novel ideas that are percolating, and those are also in Maine. Shocking. I've written short stories that are about and set in other locations, but there's something about the idea of a novel. When I think about writing it set outside of Maine, it doesn't feel right to me yet. I think at some point I'll move away from the state in longer fiction form, but right now novel writing and setting works in Maine are kind of like synonymous for me, or it seems to be. I need to maybe like set a challenge someday of, I'm going to write a book like that doesn't take place in a small town in Maine. It'll probably be like some sci-fi space odyssey or something. Well, maybe as far away as possible.
Maybe your characters can just do a weekend away. I mean, maybe you can sort of like a B&B in like Vermont.
The Maine vacation novel, yeah.
Varm and Nancy, we sort of touched on a little bit about sort of the publishing process, and you mentioned that when you had sort of first heard that Greg was going to be publishing a novel, you were skeptical, although I know you were joking. But that then you heard that this was sort of the next Louise Erdrich or sort of whatever the buzz was. This was a very buzzy novel. I mean, I heard about The Lowering Days months and months before it was published. You know, friends were sending me things and saying like, oh, that you're gonna love this. This sounds so good, and um, you know, I don't expect that we're going to sort of unlock the mystery of publishing in this conversation, or if we do, we're definitely going to go viral. But I mean, I wonder what thoughts you have as booksellers. Do you shape tastes? Do you create buzz? Do you push books? Or are you just kind of out there responding to the market and responding to demand and giving people what they want? I mean, how do you view it?
It's definitely the first. I mean, you have a lot of space in the beginning when you open a bookstore, and how are you going to fill these shelves? And you get recommendations. And in fact, when we first opened 17 years ago, we had a pad of paper on the counter, and we asked people for what are we missing, what favorite books, because we knew some, we all worked at the Fertile Mind, but we wanted to know what other people wanted. And even that was for kids too, so kids would come in and put down their ideas, and that was really helpful. But when it came to just on an ongoing basis, Lindsay McGuire, my other business partner here, does a lot of our ordering. And one guideline she said is, I think the books here, I want every book here to be one that at least one of us, and there are 10 of us associated with this bookstore now, feels passionate about. She didn't want to have books. We didn't want to have books that were just there because it was a New York Times bestseller, or, and in fact, at one time, a couple came from New York City in the summer and browsed for 3 hours, and very, very thoughtfully looked at our collection and said, you don't have the books that we necessarily see in every chain bookstore. They all have the same selection. You have some unique selections. And that was really made us feel, validated, and that going by our own taste, at least as a starting place. Of course, we read the New York Times book reviews, and we definitely want to have the hottest books. But I don't think that's our primary guideline. No. And I also that when you asked if you can have effect on people's taste.
Oh boy, yes.
One of the things we do here that, and I don't do it as much as some of our other staff, but is the way we display things and having displays around a theme. And it makes for really wonderful, strange bedfellows, especially like if we just have a window in the middle of winter that's bright yellow. And when you do it all from a color, you're going to have kids' books in with philosophy and with cookbooks, everything. And it throws these books together, and people see them with a fresh, oh my gosh, that book has maybe been on the shelf for 3 years, but now it's out, face out. As soon as you put a book face out on the shelf, you increase the chances that it's going to be picked up by about 100%. So there's a certain power in that, but it's also a responsibility. And I think it's hard for us to hand sell a book if we don't believe in it ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I think that I think there's a little bit of a mix here, because I mean, we'd be nuts not to carry the latest Ann Patchett and the latest Louise Penny and the latest Christina Baker. We'd be crazy. So, but we tend to go, this is probably terrible because I love John Grisham, and he's Lord knows he's a huge supporter of independent bookstores and publishing. But let's be honest, we don't carry 6 of John Grisham's latest novels because you can get them anywhere. And sort of to what Barb said, I mean, I'm probably the only one who reads mysteries sort of regularly here. But if we don't read the books, if we don't have a passion for them ourselves, then we can't sell them. And there's no greater joy we have than having someone come in the store and saying, I need a book and I don't know what I want to read, and I'm kind of in this mood, and we ask questions, and then we feel like sort of the spider, getting the fly into our web. And it's so beautiful to see somebody's face light up and say, I never heard of this writer. I never knew this person. I never, and they walk away with not just a new book, but with a new experience waiting for them. And that just makes our day. Right. It really makes our day.
We also fill out bookmarks in books and with our staff picks, and we'll write a personal review. And we have those out a lot in the summer when people are really looking for things and it's crowded in here and you can't necessarily spend a lot of time. But what's fun is when somebody will come in and say, where's Julia's section? I've just read 3 books that she recommended. She gets me. I line up with her, and it's really a fun way that a person can have an influence even when they're not in the shop at the time. So
you get fans. You get fans. I want to ask you about. I want to do a little bit of a segue here, and Barb and Nancy, I'm going to stick with you for a minute, then I'm going to come over to Greg second. But I want to bring up the topic of genre. Because I love what you said about the or sort of organizing it by color and sort of the way that that changes how people might look at a shelf or sort of interact with a store. And I think about genre as a concept a lot, and I understand its sort of purpose in kind of publishing and bookselling and sort of guiding readers. But I wonder how you think about it as a bookseller. Do you think that it is a filter that keeps readers from encountering books that they would not that they might love, but they're never going to wander over to the sci-fi shelf? Are there writers over in fantasy who are composing beautiful sentences who should be mixed in with literary? Or how do you think about that?
It can be really difficult. It can be very difficult sometimes when we're unpacking, and it depends on who's unpacking a box, even though in our inventory online or our book log system, we may have, for example, I've been recently trying to get Daphne du Maurier restocked in the store. Well, do her books go in mystery? Or do they go in fiction? Do some go in fiction and some go in mystery?
We have big
and
fights.
We have fights over this.
Yeah.
And watch out if you go on vacation for a week, because you'll come back and Daphne's all moved out of mystery and into fiction and back again. We were just talking about this the other day, that Sutton Foster, the Broadway star who's starring in Music Man now, and she's written a memoir on how crafting helped her get through some very difficult times in her life. Well, I am a huge fan of musical theater, so I ordered it right away and was going to put it in performing arts and or bio. I wasn't here when it arrived, so somebody else put it with knitting, and I came in and I went, no, it's not about knitting. So we had an argument about that. Yeah. And this goes on and on and on. It can be a little frightening because we really, I think it's power none of us want,
But also recently, it's interesting. We had, during the pandemic, we had to expand our one shelf on racial books to a huge, many layered section because of the whole Black Lives Matter issue and mindset that it came up, and people wanted to desperately read those books. It was really interesting how many people in Maine were coming in and devouring those books. And so all of a sudden that whole section grew really big. And we had to make decisions about, did we put fiction in with nonfiction and memoir, because the section was just expanding like that, or did we stick with more contemporary and historical books? It's a challenge to divide things, because books don't necessarily fit in one little niche all the time. And
no, that's right, they don't. I often say I love the genre system as a reader because it tells me where to go in a bookstore, and I really don't appreciate it as a writer because I can feel pegged. Greg, I want to sort of come over to you. I mean, The Lowering Days is solidly sitting on literary fiction shelves, I think, in bookstores. I want to ask you sort of a two-part question. I mean, first, sort of, what does that mean to you, sort of, to be in the literary fiction world? And secondly, how do you think about genre as both a reader and a writer? Is there a Greg Brown romance novel in a drawer somewhere? Do you like to browse? Do you like to browse through sci-fi and fantasy and YA, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, so my first love as a reader were genre. I was as a kid, I loved mythology, I loved folk tales and fairy tales, I loved epic fantasy, and that's kind of like the ability of those stories, which for me when I was younger and still now, I mean, they're about the world we know, or a world that's very different than our world, or a world that has like a world underneath the world we're seeing in the book. I always love that kind of magic. And I found that when I first started trying to write, it's funny you mentioned I don't have any romance novels in a drawer at this desk, but at the desk at my dad's house back in Belfast, in one of the drawers, I'm pretty sure there's a notebook from 6th grade that was the first attempt at a novel I ever started. And it was about a girl I had a crush on, and of course I moved it into a vampire story because I was reading Bram Stoker back in the day, and like was kind of really into the Gothic era. So there's like a really bad middle school attempt at a vampire romance set also in mid-coast Maine that I hope never sees the light of day. It's funny I haven't gotten rid of it yet though, so I don't know. But I moved from in I guess it was like my early 20s or late teens, I started reading more literary fiction. I went to a really small college in Waterville, Maine called Thomas College. It tended to be a place that was, it's for mostly first generation Maine college students. It's a business school, but I found two amazing English teachers there, Mark Wallace and Ellen McQuiston, and they introduced me to Flannery O'Connor. And from there, and they also introduced me to Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And my mind was pretty blown between Southern Gothic realism and magical realism, and just what could be done in more literary fiction. And I immediately fell in love with literary fiction, with the depth of character, the depth of attention to place, and the depth of ability to transfer interemotional landscapes. That's something I wasn't finding in some of the genre that I had read when I was younger. So I started writing literary fiction, and I didn't think much about the genre kind of literary divide for years, and until some of my work started to get a little more speculative. And I have some material that I've written that's kind of more genre based, or kind of more magical realist. Certainly the Lowering Days kind of slides into magical realism at times, but it's less kind of decidedly like literary fiction. And I like seeing the kind of line between commercial fiction and literary fiction continue to, I guess, blur a little bit. One of my favorite authors is, Carmen Maria Machado, who I went to grad school with. And I love what Carmen does as far as walking the line between literary fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, dystopian fiction, fairy tales, fables. So I guess it's something that I'm thinking about more and more as I continue to get older, as I continue to write more. And for years, I kind of didn't think a lot about genre. I thought about the book that I was working on, which was the Lowering Days. And it kind of like took me in the direction that it took me, which is a decidedly literary novel. There's also kind of an element of historical fiction to a degree in there. And it's a bit of people have called it a tiny epic, which I don't mind at all. But I think like going forward that there may be more genre-based fiction in my life, and I certainly hope so. And I wanted to say really quickly too, anybody in the Belfast area, they need to stop into Left Bank, just because it's an amazing bookstore, but it's also, the store itself is kind of a work of art. And I'm thinking of this as you're describing like the attention, Barb and Nancy, that you put into where to place books into your displays. It's just a beautiful kind of entity in itself.
Thank you. So sweet of you to say.
The plug, and everything you're saying is just so fascinating. It is a tiny. The book is a small. The book does, by the way, have a real epic feel. It's something I thought a lot about after I finished reading it, and sort of thought about how you accomplish that. And I don't know if you have any insight into that. I mean, I think that the mythological dimension of the book, I think, sort of lends it that epic quality, but it also it's a book that reminded me of Anthony Marr's book, Constellation of Vital Phenomena, which he blurbed this. And I think both books sort of have this feeling of connecting the individual stories to this sort of great swath of sort of history and humanity. And I love it, but I can't necessarily reverse engineer how it was accomplished. And I don't know if you can, or if it's just something that emerged as you were writing the book.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of a conscious choice and a little bit of something that emerged in the writing of the book. Also, it's always fun to try to reverse engineer how someone does something with a book. It's like that's a fun game for us writers. But the Lowering Days, it started as a very small story, a story about a family, and I noticed that it started to kind of, I guess the easy metaphor for me would be like growth rings on a tree. If you look at a tree that's been cut, you'll see the really small center ring, and then you'll see all these other rings growing out around, right? So I noticed when I was writing The Lowering Days that the world I was writing about kept broadening. I was writing about this family, and then I was writing about two families, and then how two families nest in a community, and then how a community nests within an area, and how an area nests within a state, both politically and culturally, and how kind of a state then fits within a country. And that's just the elements of people that's in one time period. Then you start going back through time and bringing history into the book. So I found that it kept broadening out and getting bigger, and the cast of characters were getting bigger, and the scope of the book time-wise was getting bigger, and I liked that. What I didn't like was as it continued to get bigger, it would get less focused in a way, and I had to kind of keep bringing it back to what I thought was like the crux of the novel. And at one time, the book was about 120 pages longer than it ended up published at. So it was a bigger story, more, I guess, more traditionally an epic in length. But at the same time, for me, like where that story was going, it was a little too diffuse, and I knew that material wasn't right for this particular book. So I cut that off, and then it kind of focused the book down to its current, form that it was published in. And I think that one of the things I didn't want to change was this feeling I had when I was writing it of kind of capturing this kind of dreamscape of an area. And I think that for the most part is still in the book. And I think that kind of ties into like the mythological or the mythic kind of elements of the book. A friend of mine, after they read it for the first time, told me that it felt like just a mythography being created for a place. And I'm like, sweet, okay, it's working, because that's exactly what I wanted to do.
That is what it feels like. That is what it feels like. That's so well said. That's fascinating. We are starting to run down on time, so we need to sell some books. Before we do, Greg, I just want to let you know, you might have missed it, but my wife is in the chat demanding a YA mid-coast vampire novel. So like, dig that thing out, because I think it has legs.
I think like when I'm just beaten up on myself and I can't write and everything feels like trash, I just need I need to go another direction and just go back to that YA.
That's it. Like the vampires of Harrington, Maine. I mean, just like, come on. We want it. Okay, Barb and Nancy, you're the pros, so we're going to go to you first, and I want to remind the audience that this isn't a free ride. We are here to support independent bookstores. We are here to sell some books. The info is in the chat. There's only one place you should be buying from, and that is from Left Bank Books. Obviously, you should be picking up a copy of The Lowering Days. If you have it, get another, because it makes a great gift. I gave out a bunch at Christmas, and I believe the paperback's coming soon. Is that right, Greg?
Yeah. I think March 2nd. It's right around the corner.
Awesome. Barb and Nancy, besides The Lowering Days, what are you reading, and what are you excited about right now?
I'm just going to go with one other main author first. I just have two books, but Margarites Harbor by Eleanor Morse is a wonderful book about family relationships, which, by the way, Greg's book has so much of that, and it's so authentic and kind of fresh. The tensions within the family that he described are really compelling. But this book, also, it starts out with an aging grandmother who is becoming demented, and she sets her house on fire. So it's a very accidentally. It's the very beginning, and it's all about how everybody in the family, including the grandchildren, come to terms with that difficult situation and how it affects everybody when they move in together. It's set in Maine. It's also beautifully written and one of those books you just can't put down. Mm-hmm. But my all-time favorite this last year was Maggie O'Farrell's Hamnet, which is a favorite of Nancy's, a favorite of Julia's. We constantly are hand selling this book. It is brilliantly, vividly written. It centers on the character who's never named by name, which is William Shakespeare and his wife and their son, Hamnet, who was a twin. And in real life, they did have twin children. And Hamnet is an alternative name for Hamlet, which is where his play came. But this is the twin. It's a boy and girl twins, and the boy dies. And the whole book becomes a study, in how that affects everyone. And the way she describes grief and the mourning process for each person within the family is so compelling and so beautifully done. I just can't forget it. It's one of those books that just stays with you. And yet it's not a downer book at all. It's a really extraordinary, beautiful book, and it's in paperback, and we hand sell it every day.
It's a great book, and it has the ending of that book is the most perfect ending that you'll ever read for a novel. Just so gorgeous. Thank you for that. Greg, we know you're not a professional, but I know you're going to do your best. Sell the audience some books. What are you excited about?
Yeah. So books to go buy at Left Bank. Let's see. I just want to hear that I just finished Everyone Knows Your Mother is a Witch by Galchin, which it's a really beautiful book, and it's a book that hit me with an unexpected kind of pull. I didn't know how deeply I was going to go into it and how deeply I was going to love and resonate with individual scenes. So it's set in the 1620s, set in Germany, and it's about the trial of Katrina Kepler, who was Johann Kepler, the famed astrologer's mother, and she was accused of witchcraft. It's based on historical fact. His mother was actually accused of witchcraft, and he used some of his power to kind of help defend her and other things. But what's great about this book is it totally captures the modern kind of persecution of women that we're seeing play out in 2020 and 2021, and continuing kind of othering and castigating of folks that comes down to just othering in small communities, something that we're familiar with in Massachusetts and in Maine. But I savored it. It was one of those books I did not want to end. It took me, I think, 3 months to read it, and it's not because I didn't love it. It's just because I was rereading scenes and just hanging on the sentences. She writes the most beautiful sentences. And one other novel that came out last year, I don't have it with me right now, it's downstairs, but it's Damnation Spring by Ash Davidson. Came out in August. It's a literary fiction novel. It's Ash's debut. It's set in Redwood Country, out in Northern California on the Klamath River. And it's a book about, it's a book about family. It's a book about community, things that are obviously important to me as a writer. And it's a book that focuses on the impact of logging and environmental practices in that area. Just, what herbicides and pesticide use do to communities and polluting their water. It's really good. It's just one of the most beautiful stories about a family that I've read in a long, long time. And it's been getting a lot of attention and buzz, and I've been really happy to see that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Barb and Nancy, we've come to the last question of the show. It's what we always close out with. It is a fill in the blank for the bookseller. And the question is, in either one of you, or you can answer, or we can get two answers. It's totally up to you. Running an independent bookstore is part hard work, part luck, and part what else?
Love.
And I was going to say passion, loving, but you got to love books and people.
And love it.
Words.
And words.
Love it. Great answer. Thank you so much. It's been a complete pleasure to speak with all three of you. Thank you both. Thank you all so much for being on Authors Love Bookstores. Barb and Nancy, best of luck with the ongoing success of Left Bank Books. To our audience now and in future time, please head to Left Bank. The info is in the chat. Pick up a copy of The Lowering Days. Pick up a copy of the other books we've recommended. Pick up a copy of whatever you want. Just support independent booksellers. Gregory Brown, it's been a complete delight to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations on the Lowering Days. It is it's a truly beautiful work. I think it's something that's going to be read for many, many, many years, and I think it's just wonderful. And I'm privileged to have spoken with you. Thank you. To the audience, pick up a copy. It's coming out in paperback in March, followed shortly by Greg's young adult mid-coast Maine vampire romance.
Which we'll launch here at the store.
Right. I'm gonna right after we get off this, I'm gonna call my dad and have him go check, make sure that the
sure that's there.
It out.
So, that could have been thrown away. That's gold.
Yeah,
I
mean,
gold.
There's some future gold in there.
Oh my gosh! I mean, that's what's going to put your kid through college, man. That's great. To the audience, thank you as always. Thank you so much for being here with Authors Love Bookstores, supporting independent booksellers. We will be back next week. Until then, stay well. Keep reading.
Thank you.